12 dates, 12 rejections. For Millionaire CEO Walt Cameron, love had become nothing more than a business deal he never signed. Every woman he met saw only his fortune, never the man behind the name. But one night, in the middle of yet another failed dinner, a weary waitress with tired eyes and a quiet strength crossed his path. Willa Holland wasn't there to impress anyone. She was just working her second job, desperate to make it home to her daughter, Amanda. What began as a single glance and a few unguarded words would spark a connection neither expected. A connection that would challenge his pride, her fears, and change everything they thought they knew about love. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The chandeliers above the Langford Hotel's rooftop restaurant glowed like frozen constellations, showering golden light over polished cutlery, champagne flutes, and women dressed in glittering gowns. Walt Cameron sat at a corner table, back straight, suit immaculate, expression unreadable. Across from him, a socialite with diamond earrings bigger than her smile laughed a little too loudly at her own joke. He had been through this ritual too many times to count. Names blurred, conversations repeated like scripts. Vacations on private islands, luxury cars, charity galas. None of it mattered. By the end of every dinner, he always reached the same conclusion. They wanted Walt Cameron, the CEO, never Walt, the man. So then I told the stylist, absolutely not. If my dress doesn't arrive in Milan by Tuesday, we'll sue. The woman was saying. She paused, expecting his approval. Of course, Walt murmured, though he hadn't been listening. His eyes drifted past her, to the city skyline through the glass walls. Neon bled into the winter night, and for the 100th time he wondered how a life so full could feel this empty. He set down his fork. I think this isn't going to work, he said, voice steady, polite, final. The woman blinked, startled. Excuse me, you deserve someone who cares about all of this. He gestured vaguely at the wine, the candles, the staged perfection. That isn't me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she stood, collected her clutch, and stalked toward the elevator, heels clattering like gunfire across marble. Walt exhaled slowly. Another rejection, or maybe, he thought grimly, another escape. That was when she appeared. The waitress, young, uniform crisp but slightly faded from long shifts. A stray strand of dark hair had slipped from her braid and brushed against her cheek. Her eyes were shadowed by fatigue, yet steady. She moved quietly, gathering the empty glasses left behind. As she reached for his, their eyes met. A brief, uncalculated moment. No practiced smile, no calculation, no hint of awe, just recognition, the kind that passes between two tired people who have seen enough of the world to understand exhaustion when they spot it. Not every drink leaves a good taste, right? She said softly, stacking the crystal with practiced ease. It was casual, almost careless, meant as a comment about the champagne, but her words struck deeper. Walt stared at her, then, for the first time that night, allowed himself a real smile. Exactly. Some are worse than others. She tilted her head, studying him with faint curiosity. Do you always agree this quickly with strangers? Do you always speak this honestly to them? Willa's lips curved, not quite into a smile. Only when they look like they need it. And just like that, she was gone, gliding back toward the kitchen with her tray. Walt sat frozen, a half-empty glass before him. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But for the first time in years, A few simple words from a stranger had cut through the fog of wealth, status, and expectation. And he found himself wondering if he would ever see her again. Morning in the city never came gently. The shriek of bus brakes, the blare of impatient horns, the rush of feet on cracked sidewalks. It all collided into the soundtrack of another ordinary day. For Willa Holland, ordinary meant exhaustion. Her alarm had gone off at 5:30 a.m., a harsh reminder that sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. By 6, she was already in her tiny kitchen, balancing a pan of scrambled eggs while checking Amanda's homework sheets. "Mom, I can't find my other shoe." Amanda's voice echoed from their shared bedroom. "It's under the bed, sweetheart. Left side." Willa flipped the eggs with one hand and smoothed her waitress uniform with the other. The fabric had lost its crispness long ago, and she had stitched the hem herself after it caught on a stairwell nail 2 weeks earlier. A pair of small feet thudded across the linoleum. Amanda appeared, shoe in hand, hair wild from sleep. At 8 years old, she was a whirlwind of curiosity and stubbornness. She also carried more quiet wisdom than Willa liked to admit. "Breakfast," Willa said, sliding the eggs onto a chipped plate. She set it on their small table, already cluttered with crayons, bills, and a coffee mug she'd been refilling since midnight. Amanda plopped into the chair. "Do you have to work tonight too?" "Yes." Willa hated the heaviness in her own voice. "But Mrs. Green will watch you after school. I'll be back before you go to bed." Amanda nodded, chewing slowly. She didn't complain, she never did. That silence, more than anything, broke Willa's heart. Childhood wasn't supposed to be about understanding bills and long shifts. By 7, they were out the door, bundled against the wind that whipped between apartment blocks. The city smelled of gasoline and stale coffee. Amanda clutched her mother's hand tightly as they crossed the street. At the bus stop, Willa crouched to adjust Amanda's scarf. "Remember math test today. Just do your best. I'm proud of you already." Amanda smiled, gap-toothed and genuine. "Okay." When the school bus arrived, Willa hugged her daughter quickly, not trusting herself to linger. Watching Amanda climb the steps, waving before she disappeared inside, Willa felt the familiar ache in her chest. Another day apart. Another day measured in tips and hourly wages. She walked quickly toward her first job at the downtown cafe, dodging puddles and clusters of office workers. Her shift began at 8 sharp, and the manager had warned her more than once about lateness. By the time she arrived, her hair was damp from the drizzle, but she tied on her apron with practiced efficiency. The cafe was modest, far from the luxury of the Langford Hotel where she sometimes picked up extra shifts. The air smelled of burnt espresso and buttered toast. She spent the morning refilling mugs, balancing plates on aching arms, offering polite smiles that rarely reached her eyes. By noon, her feet throbbed. She had 4 hours before she had to change uniforms, catch a bus across town, and start her second shift, cleaning offices in one of Ellswood's glass towers. Some nights, she barely made it home by midnight, and yet she pushed on. She always did, because at the end of every shift, no matter how exhausted, she reminded herself, this isn't forever. It's just for Amanda. That afternoon, fate brushed close again. On her way back from the cafe's dumpster with a bag of trash, she nearly collided with a man stepping out of a sleek black car parked at the corner. She muttered a quick apology, not even lifting her eyes. But when she did, her breath caught. It was him, Walt Cameron. Gone was the polished dinner jacket from the night before. Today he wore a dark overcoat, simple but perfectly cut. His gaze was sharp as ever, yet softer now, almost curious. For a moment, neither spoke. The memory of their brief exchange at the restaurant lingered between them. "You again," he said finally, with the faintest trace of amusement. "Don't look so surprised," Willa replied, shifting the trash bag to her other hand. "Some of us work more than one job." The honesty in her tone startled him. Most people either tried to impress him or pretend they didn't recognize him. But this woman, this waitress, this stranger, spoke as though he were just another man on the street. "Do you always speak this honestly to strangers?" he asked, echoing his own words from the night before. Her mouth twitched. "Only when they look like they need it." Before he could answer, a voice called her name from inside the cafe. She gave him a brief nod and walked away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk, watching as the door swung shut behind her. For the rest of the afternoon, Walt found himself distracted. He had meetings, phone calls, contracts waiting on his desk at Cameron Enterprises. But none of it silenced the image of her worn uniform, her tired eyes, and the way she spoke without fear. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity, just an interruption in his routine. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The bell above the cafe door gave a faint, tired jingle as Willa Holland stepped inside, brushing the cold morning air from her coat. She had just dropped Amanda at school, kissed her daughter's forehead, and hurried across the block for a few stolen minutes of warmth before her next shift. The cafe was small, the kind of place students and taxi drivers ducked into for cheap coffee and a quick sandwich. The tiles were cracked, the walls painted a dull yellow, but to Willa, it was a brief sanctuary. She ordered the cheapest cup on the menu, clutching it in both hands as she slid into a booth near the window. Steam curled into her face, thawing the ache in her bones. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Just 5 minutes of quiet. That was all she needed before another long day. The door jingled again. Heavy footsteps, measured and certain, crossed the floor. She didn't look up until the voice at the counter caught her attention. Deep, calm, with that crisp edge she remembered from the rooftop restaurant. Her heart stilled. Walt Cameron. She blinked, instinctively lowering her gaze, hoping he wouldn't notice. Of all the cafes in Ellswood, why here? Why now? He wasn't supposed to exist in this part of the city. Men like him belonged to penthouses and boardrooms, not dingy booths with chipped mugs. But fate had other plans. When Walt turned from the counter, coffee in hand, his eyes swept the cafe and landed on her. Recognition flickered, followed by something more, an interest that startled even him. Willa cursed silently under her breath. She didn't want attention. Not his, not anyone's. She shifted in her seat, hoping he'd walk past. Instead, he crossed the room and stopped at her booth. "Mind if I sit?" His tone was casual, but the question was more request than command. Willa hesitated. She should have said no. She should have told him she valued peace more than conversation. But instead, perhaps out of exhaustion, perhaps out of some strange pull, she muttered, "It's your city. Do what you want." Walt slid into the seat opposite her, setting his cup on the table. For a few moments, silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of two old men playing chess near the back. "You don't look surprised," he said finally. "I've seen worse things than a millionaire in a hole-in-the-wall cafe," Willa replied, her voice steady. He arched a brow. "You know who I am. Everyone does. She took a sip of her coffee. But I'm not interested in your resume. Walt felt something inside him shift. Most people he met were interested in nothing else. You work too much, he said, studying the shadows under her eyes. Her gaze snapped to his, sharp and defensive. You don't know anything about me. No, he admitted. But I noticed. Last night you were on your feet until past midnight. This morning you're already here, still in uniform. That's not just one job. Her fingers tightened around her mug. For a moment, she considered shutting him out. But something about his tone, it wasn't pity, wasn't judgment. It was observation, honest like hers had been. I do what I have to, she said finally. For my daughter. There it was. A word that landed heavier than any polished introduction. Daughter. Walt leaned back, considering her. He had expected excuses, small talk, maybe even indifference. He hadn't expected honesty, raw and unadorned. What's her name? He asked. Suspicion flickered across her face. But again, his voice carried no agenda, just quiet curiosity. Amanda, she said at last. Something softened in him. He thought of his own childhood, of long evenings in an empty mansion while his father chased deals and his mother chased society. Loneliness had been his constant companion. Hearing her speak her daughter's name with such devotion unsettled him more than he cared to admit. She's lucky, he said quietly. Willa gave a short, humorless laugh. Lucky? To have a mom who barely sleeps, who counts tips to buy notebooks, who's too tired to help with every project. To have a mom who fights, he corrected. That's rarer than you think. The words silenced her. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in the tailored coat with the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time, she wondered if maybe there was more to him than headlines and fortune. Before either could speak again, the cafe door jingled once more. A cluster of businessmen entered, laughter booming as they ordered. Walt glanced at them, then back at her. His world and hers were colliding in this tiny booth, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to push him away or lean closer. I should go, Willa said, sliding out of the seat. I'm late already. Will I see you again? The question escaped him before he could stop it. She froze, turning halfway toward the door. Depends, she said, voice low. You planning to haunt cheap cafes more often? A smile tugged at his lips. Maybe. And then she was gone, swallowed by the morning rush outside. Walt sat alone, his coffee cooling untouched. For years, every date, every encounter had ended in emptiness. But now, a single mother with 2 jobs, a woman who hadn't even tried to impress him, had left him restless in a way he hadn't felt in a lifetime. 2 worlds had collided, and he already knew he wanted more. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm Walt Cameron had long ago memorized. Meetings, contracts, boardrooms where voices echoed and pens scratched across paper. Yet, for the first time in years, the rhythm faltered. Every time he glanced at his phone, every pause between appointments, his mind wandered back to the small cafe and the woman who had walked out, leaving him with questions he didn't know how to answer. It wasn't her beauty, though she had that, an understated grace hidden behind exhaustion. It was her honesty, the way she had said Amanda with such quiet pride, the way she hadn't cared who he was. By Thursday, he found himself lingering near the school block where she had said her daughter studied. It wasn't planned, at least that's what he told himself. His driver had raised an eyebrow when Walt requested to be dropped off 2 blocks away from the Cameron Tower, but Walt ignored it. He stood by the corner bookstore, hands deep in his coat pockets, watching the stream of children pour from the school gates. And then he saw her, Willa, waiting with her coat pulled tight against the wind, her hair escaping its braid. Amanda ran to her, small backpack bouncing, arms wrapping around her mother's waist. The sight pierced him with a sharpness he hadn't expected. He stayed where he was just watching, until Amanda's eyes landed on him. The little girl tilted her head, curiosity plain on her face. She whispered something to her mother, and Willa's gaze snapped in his direction. The moment their eyes met, he knew he had been caught. She crossed the street quickly, Amanda's hand clasped tightly in hers. "Are you following us now?" she demanded, her tone low but firm. Walt raised his hand slightly. "No, I was nearby. He stopped, realizing how hollow it sounded. "I wanted to see you again." Willa narrowed her eyes. "That's not how people like you usually say hello." Amanda looked between them, then tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom, who is he?" Willa hesitated. Before she could answer, Walt crouched slightly to Amanda's level. "I'm Walt," he said softly. "Just a friend." Amanda studied him, her young face serious. "You wear the same shoes as the men in the tall buildings." Walt blinked, then almost laughed. "You notice everything, don't you?" "She does," Willa said, pulling Amanda a little closer. But her voice had softened, just enough for him to catch it. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the exchange. A child had looked at him, not as a CEO, not as a name in the papers, but as a man with expensive shoes standing awkwardly in the cold. And strangely, it had felt good. The following weekend, he found an excuse to return to that same corner cafe. He didn't expect her to be there, but when the door jingled and Willa walked in, Amanda at her side, he felt a spark of something dangerously close to hope. Willa spotted him instantly. "You again." "Maybe I like the coffee," Walt said. Amanda giggled. "The coffee here is terrible." For the first time, Willa laughed too. A small, genuine sound that tugged at something buried deep inside him. She slid into a booth with Amanda, and Walt, after a pause, joined them. The hours that followed slipped by in a way Walt hadn't experienced in years. They talked, not about money or business or the hollow chatter that filled most of his evenings. They talked about small things. Amanda's favorite subject in school, Willa's dislike for winter mornings, the mural Amanda had painted on her bedroom wall with leftover markers. At one point, Amanda pulled out a notebook and began to sketch absent-mindedly. Walt watched her, fascinated. "You're an artist?" Amanda shrugged. "I like to draw. It makes the world quieter." Something in her words struck him. He had spent years surrounded by noise, voices, deals, the endless demands of power. Quieter had never been an option. "You're good," he said honestly. Amanda glanced up at him, as if testing his sincerity. Then slowly she smiled. From then on, the three of them found themselves meeting more often. Sometimes it was coffee after school. Sometimes a walk through the park, Amanda skipping ahead while Walt and Willa trailed behind, speaking in half-finished sentences that meant more than they admitted. For Willa, it was unsettling. She hadn't expected him to stay. She hadn't expected him to listen. Yet each time he appeared, he did so without grandeur, without the arrogance she associated with men of his world. He carried Amanda's backpack once when the straps broke. He listened when Willa vented about double shifts. He never offered pity, only presence. For Walt, it was transformative. He began to cancel meetings, something his assistant found unthinkable. He traded boardrooms for sidewalks, contracts for conversations. In Willa's world, stripped of expectation, he felt human. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching Amanda chase pigeons, Walt glanced at Willa. "You don't like me very much, do you?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're not used to people saying no, are you?" "Not often." "Well," she said, folding her arms, "I don't dislike you. I just don't trust you. Yet." The word hung in the air. Yet. Walt nodded slowly. It was more than he deserved, and enough to keep him trying. That night, as snow began to fall over the city, he realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be Walt Cameron, the CEO. He just wanted to be Walt, the man sitting beside a single mother and her daughter, laughing at pigeons. And for once, that felt like enough. For weeks, their fragile routine continued. Coffee after school, walks in the park, brief dinners in cheap cafes where Amanda drew pictures on napkins while Willa and Walt talked in cautious tones. It was simple, imperfect, unpolished, and yet it felt more real than anything Walt had known in years. But reality has sharp teeth, and sooner or later it bites. The first crack appeared one morning when Walt walked into his office at Cameron Tower. His assistant, Lydia, looked up from her desk, her expression unusually tense. She slid a tablet across the polished surface. "You should see this." On the screen was a glossy headline from one of Ellswood's most notorious gossip sites. "Millionaire CEO seen with mystery single MOM. Gold digger or true love?" Beneath it, a grainy photograph. Walt, carrying Amanda's broken backpack on his shoulder as they crossed a street together. Willa walked beside him, scarf pulled tight against the wind, eyes lowered. Walt's stomach twisted. He scrolled further. Comments flooded the article. "She's obviously after his money. Cute kid. Poor guy doesn't know what's coming." Finally fell for the nanny cliché. He clenched the tablet so hard his knuckles whitened. He had faced bad press before, rumors about hostile takeovers, scandals about failed mergers. But this felt different. This wasn't about his company. This was about her. About Amanda. "Do you want me to draft a statement?" Lydia asked carefully. "No," Walt said sharply. He set the tablet down, forcing his voice calm. "Leave it." But he couldn't leave it. By the afternoon, more outlets had picked up the story. Photographers lingered near the cafe. Willa noticed them first. She was walking Amanda home when the flash of a camera startled the girl, making her cling to her mother's arm. "Mom, why are they taking pictures?" Amanda whispered, fear tightening her voice. "Don't look," Willa murmured, pulling her close. Her chest burned with anger and humiliation. She had lived her whole life avoiding notice, working quietly, staying invisible. Now strangers on the internet dissected her clothes, her face, her worth. That evening, when Walt arrived outside her apartment building, Willa was waiting on the steps. Amanda had already gone inside. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with fury. "Willa, you knew this would happen." Her eyes flashed. "You knew what kind of world you live in, and you let us walk right into it." He flinched. "I never wanted this for you." "But it doesn't matter what you wanted," she snapped, "because it's already happening." My daughter had men shouting questions at her on the way home. "She's 8 years old, Walt." He reached for her arm, but she pulled back. "Please just listen. I can fix this. I can protect you." "No," her voice cut like glass. "That's not the point. I don't need a man with money to protect me like I'm some liability. I needed you to be honest about what being with you really means. And you weren't." The words landed heavier than any boardroom blow. For the first time in years, Walt felt powerless. "Maybe I don't belong in your world," Willa said quietly. "You belong wherever you decide you do," he replied, desperation edging his voice. "And I'd rather that be beside me." Her gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but only for a second. She shook her head. "I can't drag Amanda through this storm. I won't." And with that, she turned and disappeared into the building, leaving him standing in the cold, cameras flashing from across the street. That night, Walt sat in his penthouse, the city glittering outside his windows like a taunt. He poured himself a drink, but it went untouched. For the first time in his life, control slipped from his grasp. Deals, power, reputation, none of it mattered. He had built an empire on certainty, but one single mother with tired eyes had unraveled him. And now he was losing her. 3 days passed. 3 endless days where Walt Cameron buried himself in work, hoping the chaos of contracts and numbers would drown out the hollow ache in his chest. Didn't. Everywhere he turned, reminders of her lingered. A half-crushed napkin Amanda had doodled on, left in the pocket of his coat. The faint citrus scent that clung to his car after she'd sat in the back seat. The memory of Willa's eyes, hurt, guarded, yet filled with the fire of a woman who refused to break. By the 4th day, Walt knew he couldn't let it end this way. He had spent a lifetime hiding behind walls of steel and glass. But walls kept people out, and for the first time he wanted someone in. He canceled his afternoon schedule, a move that made his assistant Lydia nearly faint, and drove himself across town. No chauffeur, no black SUV, no entourage. Just him. The place he chose was not one of Ellswood's glittering hotels or rooftop restaurants. It was a small community center on the east side, tucked between an old bookstore and a laundromat. Few people knew it, but Walt had quietly funded it for years in memory of his late mother, who had believed that art and music could save children from the streets. He had never once brought anyone here, until now. He sent Willa a short message. "Meet me tonight, please. If not for me, for Amanda." When she arrived, suspicion shadowed her face. She had left Amanda with Mrs. Green, too wary to bring her into whatever this was. Willa folded her arms as she stepped inside, her eyes narrowing at the rows of easels, the shelves of paints, the piano in the corner. "What is this?" she asked. Walt stood in the middle of the room, uncharacteristically uncertain. "A place I've kept hidden. A place that matters." She raised a brow. "And why am I here?" "Because you once said Amanda likes to draw," he replied quietly. "And because you said the world feels quieter when she does. I thought, maybe she deserves a place where the world can be quiet for both of you." For a moment, silence filled the space. Willa looked around, at the blank canvases waiting for color, at the brushes lined up neatly, at the warm lights strung across the ceiling. It didn't look like his world. It looked like hers. Her throat tightened. "You think you can fix this with paints and brushes?" "No," Walt said, stepping closer. "I can't fix what's already happened. I can't stop the cameras or the articles. But I can choose to stand beside you in the storm instead of watching you face it alone. And I can show you that when I see you, I don't see a liability. I see the only person who's ever looked at me and seen a man, not a name." The rawness in his voice startled her. Gone was the smooth CEO tone, the polished armor. This was something stripped bare. "Walt, Her voice faltered. I know I should have told you what being with me really means. I was afraid. Afraid you'd walk away before I had the chance to prove myself. But the truth is, I don't want a life without you. Or Amanda. For a long moment, Willa stood frozen, every instinct screaming to run, to protect herself and her daughter. But behind his words, she saw something undeniable. A man trying, not with wealth or promises, but with vulnerability. Slowly, she walked toward one of the easels. Her fingers brushed the blank canvas, the bristles of a brush. Amanda would love this, she murmured. Walt's chest loosened with relief. Then bring her, tomorrow, or the day after, whenever you want. This is yours as much as it's mine. Finally, she turned to him. Her eyes shimmered, not with weakness but with the strength of someone who'd carried too much alone. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but this is the first real thing you've shown me. He nodded. Then I'll keep showing you, as long as it takes. That night, they didn't solve everything. There was no kiss, no dramatic embrace. Just two people sitting at a long wooden table, mugs of tea between them, brushes scattered across the surface. Willa painted a single blue stroke on the canvas, then set the brush down. Walt followed with a line of green, uneven and clumsy. For the first time, they laughed together. And somewhere in that quiet room, beneath strings of warm lights and the smell of turpentine, the storm began to break. The first snowfall of December blanketed Ellswood in fragile white. Streets hushed, horns muted. The city for once seemed slower, softer. For Willa Holland, winter usually meant longer hours, aching feet, and the gnawing worry of heating bills. But this year was different, because Amanda was laughing. She twirled in the courtyard outside the community center, her boots leaving crooked tracks in the snow. A notebook clutched in her mittened hands, she dashed to the nearest bench, plopped down, and began sketching snowflakes as though afraid they would vanish before her pencil caught them. Inside, Willa watched through the frosted window. She held a mug of cocoa Walt had made. A clumsy effort, far too much sugar, but it warmed her hands all the same. She wasn't sure when she had started trusting him again. Maybe the night he sat beside her at the easel, drawing crooked green lines. Maybe the morning he showed up at the cafe with Amanda's favorite colored pencils, refusing to leave until he saw her smile. Or maybe it wasn't one moment at all, but dozens, small and steady, that finally convinced her he wasn't going anywhere. The tabloids still whispered, photographers still lurked, but Walt no longer hid. He walked beside her openly, not as the CEO with perfect posture and headlines chasing his shadow, but as a man holding a child's backpack or a paper bag of groceries, or simply her hand. You're staring again, his voice teased gently behind her. Willa turned. Walt leaned in the doorway, coat dusted with snow. There was still a crispness about him, a gravity born of boardrooms and leadership. But here, in this warm, paint-scented room, that weight eased. He crossed to her, setting a small bag on the table. "What's that?" she asked. "Dinner," he said. "From Lou's. Amanda likes the pie." "You left a shareholders' meeting for pie?" Her brow lifted, skeptical. "For you too?" "Always." Willa shook her head, unable to hide her smile. He had changed his schedule, his life, even his identity, not for appearances, not for control, but for them. Amanda burst through the door, cheeks flushed pink. "Mom, look!" She held up her notebook, revealing a shaky drawing of 3 figures. A woman with long hair, a tall man in a coat, and a little girl between them, hands linked. Above, Amanda had scrawled in uneven letters, "Us." Willa's throat tightened. She glanced at Walt. For once, he didn't try to mask emotion. His eyes glistened as he crouched to Amanda's level. "It's perfect," he whispered. Amanda beamed, sliding the notebook into her bag. "Can we go eat now?" "Of course," Willa said, brushing snow from her daughter's scarf. As they stepped outside, the city lights shimmered against the falling snow. Walt walked beside them, his hand brushing against Willa's until finally, deliberately, their fingers laced together. She didn't pull away. For years, Walt Cameron had lived behind glass walls, untouchable, unreachable, rejecting everyone who came too close. But a single mom with 2 jobs and a little girl with a notebook had torn those walls down. They weren't a perfect family. Not yet. Maybe never in the picture book way. But as Amanda skipped ahead, laughing, and Walt tightened his hold on Willa's hand, one truth settled in both their hearts. They were no longer alone. And in a world that had measured them by wealth and struggle, reputation and survival, they had found something rare. Something that mattered more than money, more than fear. They had found each other. Changed. Forever.